and it can be quite helpful. So your basic needs, you've got things like physiological needs, food, water, warmth, rest. I'm talking to a bunch of doctors and healthcare professionals, don't need to explain the importance of diet and exercise and sleep. But it's actually one of the kind of core basic needs that we have. And then we've got safety needs, so security, safety. This is quite a environmental safety kind of idea. So making sure that your house is protected, your family are protected. And this can be quite a big issue when we're working with young people, even adults who are experiencing mental illness, because we find a lot of the time that their home environment is not safe. And that might be that there's domestic violence or just that, you know, that they're living in an estate which isn't the most secure. And we find that until that is sorted and until they have that security, it's really difficult to develop, to work on their kind of mental health and to help them to improve and kind of feel better. So that is a very key one, especially with things like domestic violence, making sure that they're in a safe environment. And then we move on to our kind of psychological needs. So belongingness and love, we are social beings and we do need kind of intimate relationships and friendships and that kind of social support around us. And that's a really, really key need that we have. And then we've got esteem needs. So this is really quite related to self-esteem and feeling good about ourselves, feeling as though we're accomplishing something, as if we're contributing something, feeling meaningful and deserving. And I think that's a really key point with self-care, is feeling as though you deserve it. And that's a really kind of massive part of psychological needs. And then finally, we come on to self-fulfillment needs, so self-actualization, which is basically the ability to achieve your full potential. And that includes creative activities. It includes things like developing a sense of humor, being able to find the joke in things. It involves kind of doing things that you enjoy and just kind of living a good, accomplished life or a fulfilled life where you're happy and you're able to experience happiness. And Maslow basically argued that in order to achieve the kind of higher needs, so self-fulfillment and psychological needs, we need to have the basic needs met. So unless you're kind of you've slept and you've eaten well and you know you're safe, you won't be able to kind of develop this full potential and really contribute what you're able to. But obviously that has its limitations. I think it's really more of a general guideline. If you're finding that actually you're struggling to find like humor in things, or you're struggling to find enjoyment in things, and you're struggling to achieve your full potential, it's usually because, well, it's not usually, it can sometimes be because you haven't necessarily met your basic needs. So you might find that you just haven't slept very well, you haven't eaten very well, you've maybe not got the social support around you, maybe you're struggling with your self-esteem, and that's usually what is kind of a barrier. So it can be quite helpful if you do find that you're struggling with certain things to just check in and make sure that you've got all the basic stuff met. And we use this kind of hierarchy quite a lot with our young people, and just kind of helping them to understand that until they've got the basics down, it's going to be really difficult to work on the kind of more intense stuff. So what isn't self-care? Exercising or managing your diet is a punishment. I had that chocolate bar, so I really need to work out. It's more about kind of doing these things because we can, and because, like, exercising because it feels good and because we want to do it. Saying yes to everything and everyone because you're just being nice. I will talk a little bit about boundaries later on and kind of setting limits and understanding your limits. And when you find that you're doing things like socializing, even when you don't necessarily want to, maybe that's a fear of missing out or whatever it might be, you're doing these things even though you don't necessarily want to, even though they're not necessarily going to bring you joy or bring you pleasure. You're kind of doing this thing that, okay, everyone thinks I should be doing this, so let me do it. So that can kind of encompass things that sometimes we think are self-care but aren't necessarily. And I've put retail therapy, and I've put sometimes because we all love a bit of retail therapy. But really, when it becomes a problem is when we're kind of using it as, this is going to bring me joy. I'm just going to keep buying things even though I don't have money to, and it's going to bring me short-term gratification. But in the long term, I'm going to feel like crap because I've just spent money that I don't have, and I'm probably not going to use this thing. And we all fall victim to that. I definitely impulse buy a lot of the time when I'm feeling a bit rubbish. And it's really, I mean, it's retail therapy can be really great as like a indulgence every now and again. But the thing with self-care is that it's not about a treat yourself kind of moment. It's more about a long-term sort of solution to making sure that you have cared for yourself in your lifestyle as opposed to just the occasional thing. So some kind of basic examples and ideas: getting the basics done, like I said, sleep, exercise, eating good food, eating not so good food, allowing yourself to have chocolate bar every now and again, always great self-care. Um, embracing the arts. So I will talk a little bit about COVID and how this is the pandemic, because obviously you can't not talk about COVID, and how that's kind of impacted our ability to self-care. But the arts have been a massive thing that have kind of gotten a lot of people through lockdown. Things like reading, writing, dancing, singing, music, art, all of those things. I think paint by numbers was just went through the roof at some point. And it's really about kind of embracing the little things that kind of do give us some joy or give us some meaning in life. Embracing your inner child is always something I find very fun. Whatever this might be, playing a little board game, playing with a child in your family. Well, I guess you can't really do that right now, but it's always fun to kind of play a game with a young person. And just kind of embrace some of the things you used to do when you were a child, the little things that kind of brought you joy. Hug an animal, loads of research to suggest that this helps. Breathe, just really simply taking 5 minutes out of your day to just take a step back and have a deep breath. And I will talk about mindfulness in a little bit as well, and how helpful that can be as a kind of method of self-care. Cooking and baking, this can be a really helpful kind of little way. Bubble baths and scented candles, not for everyone, but definitely worth a try. And seeing a loved one, and obviously this has been a massive thing that we're not able to do right now, but seeing a loved one, reaching out for that social support, seeing a friend, seeing a family, doing something for someone else. There's loads of research to suggest that when we give to someone else, it actually makes us feel better than when we receive from someone else. So as great as it is to get a gift, sometimes giving is really a lot better. So doing something nice for someone else, and that doesn't have to be a big thing. It can really be just going and spending time with someone, is always really lovely. Getting dressed even if you're working from home, including the part that isn't on camera. I don't want to know how many of you aren't dressed from the waist down, because I'm usually not either if I'm working from home. But really sometimes it can help to just kind of get dressed up, put some clothes on as if you were going about your normal day, and that can really make you feel like you've got your life together. And a massive one, social media detox. I will talk about technology at some point because I'm very passionate about technology. But social media detox is a very important thing that you can do to self-care. We all know the impact that social media can have on us. And really just spending a day away from our phones can make a massive difference to our mental health, and to even just acknowledge the way that we feel. Because usually, well, I don't know about you guys, but definitely for me, I'm often distracting myself using social media so that I don't have to think about my own feelings. But actually, when we find that we don't do that and we start to think about how we're feeling and how we are, it can really open up some stuff for us and really help us to embrace certain things that can be quite useful and quite meaningful. So a bit of evidence, self-compassion has been shown to improve self-improvement motivation. So for example, if you've made a mistake, treating yourself with self-compassion, which is a key part of self-care, is being compassionate to yourself, being forgiving yourself. And once you've made a mistake, is really having that forgiveness for yourself. It's been found to improve, to increase your kind of motivation to not make that mistake again, to do better, to embrace the kind of challenges that may be standing in your way to do better. But there's a ton of research to show that. Self-care, so encompassing things like sleep hygiene, social support, managing emotions, using things like mindfulness. All of those have contributed to lower levels of perceived stress in students, which we know is a massive kind of cohort, is students and the kind of stress level that they're under, especially right now. Obviously there's so many pressures and there's so many demands, and it has been shown to kind of lower levels of perceived stress. There was kind of specific research into oncology nurses, and oncology nurses who practice self-care developed self-awareness. And this development of self-awareness, of understanding how they were feeling and how they were thinking, it really kind of reduced that work-related stress and burnout, which I'm sure all of us fall victim to, is that stress and burnout, especially right now. And that development of self-awareness can also improve our ability to form effective therapeutic relationships. So we're all in a kind of field where we do need to be providing that kind of therapeutic support. Obviously, in mental health, it's actual kind of therapy. In when we're talking about kind of physical health and doctors, you do still have a therapeutic relationship with your patients, and developing that self-awareness can really allow you to form those effective relationships and provide that really kind of effective care to your patients, whether that's young people or adults, it doesn't matter. And then we've got self-care practices can improve resilience in healthcare professionals, and we all know how important resilience is for us. When there might be a difficult session, it might be a difficult patient, and it's that ability to kind of bounce back from that, and that self-awareness and that self-care can really help us with that. There has been a kind of training treatment called mindfulness-based stress reduction, and this kind of incorporates things like mindfulness and yoga in as kind of a treatment, as kind of a training, and it can be really, really effective. And it was found to improve physical and psychological well-being in participants with chronic physical illness. And on top of this, on top of kind of providing that care for the actual patients who were struggling with chronic physical illness, it also provided clinicians with kind of effective strategies. So sometimes clinicians can find that they're kind of maybe at a loss or struggling to kind of help manage that. There's only so many painkillers, there's only so many things you can do to kind of manage physical illness sometimes. So providing that kind of mindfulness strategies can really help to help clinicians as well as patients. And it can improve the physical and mental health of healthcare professionals as well as patients. And that's when we've got things like heavy caseloads, limited control over the work environment. We can't always control what the environment is like. We can't always control the pressures and the demands that are facing us, especially right now. We've been facing so many restrictions and so many different ways of working, and long hours, which I'm sure we all know very well. And mindfulness-based stress reduction actually found to kind of really improve that physical and mental health of healthcare professionals. I've put a really key point here. If you can't care for others, if you're empty, we're all in a profession where we do care for others, and that is kind of the ethos of what we do. And the thing is that if we can't care for ourselves, we can't expect to care effectively for the people that we work with. We all have a limit, and we don't have an unlimited capacity to be able to give. At some point, we're going to run out. And so it's so important to take care of yourself in whatever way that might be, and to really understand if you are caring for yourself enough in order to be able to effectively care for others. So let's think about during COVID. As much as I wanted to not include COVID in this just purely so that we could have a break from it, unfortunately it is something that we've got to talk about. A recent study by Mind, the mental health charity, they had a sample size of I think around 16,000 people, and that was about I think 14,000 adults and about 2,000 young people. So that's quite a significant sample size. And they found that 60% of adults and 68% of young people reported that their mental health has gotten worse over lockdown. 1 in 3 adults and 1 in 4 young people didn't access mental health support over lockdown as they felt they didn't deserve it. And that was a massive thing we saw, of people thinking that actually my issues aren't big enough, everyone's kind of going through the same thing, and so I don't deserve to access help. And then a quarter of those who actually did try to access it weren't able to. And we found that a massive barrier in kind of accessing mental health support recently over lockdown was kind of the video calls and the kind of technology side of it, struggling without that face-to-face connection. We kind of offered telephone and video consultations, but that created a massive barrier, rightfully so, to be honest. If it's quite unknown, you're already opening up a lot, and I'm sure you've all kind of fallen victim to this kind of Zoom WebEx lifestyle. And it can be really challenging to kind of break through some of those barriers and to really be able to engage in effective therapeutic work when you've got this barrier of a screen in between you. And as effective as it can be, we do also need to acknowledge how challenging it is, especially when we think about home environment. We found that a lot of our young people were just in a very unstable home environment. There's a lot of people in the house, there's a lot of noise, there's not very much privacy or confidentiality. And so it's right that they wouldn't want to engage in a video call or video session talking about their kind of deepest feelings, or their deepest struggles when they've got a bunch of people listening in. So it's really important to kind of be aware of that. And then we look at those who kind of had, who already kind of had a comorbid mental illness. So 73% of those who had an eating disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, or obsessive compulsive disorder reported that their mental health worsened. And then 67% of those with a long-term health condition, physical health condition, or a learning difficulty reported that their mental health worsened. So we're looking at kind of a lot of different people who, the vast majority of different cohorts who are kind of experiencing that their mental health has deteriorated over lockdown, especially when we kind of think about those who do have a comorbid mental health condition, not being able to access that support necessarily as easily, dealing with all these kind of added struggles. So what is the actual impact that COVID is having on our mental health? I'm sure we all kind of are experiencing it, and sometimes it can just help to name it. Bereavement is a massive one. And I think it's kind of getting swept under the rug a little bit. I'm pretty sure all of us in this room at least know of someone who has died from COVID or who has been severely affected by COVID. And it's that bereavement. So you've got bereavement just in general, which is such a big struggle. And actually research has shown that within the first kind of 6 months or so after experiencing a bereavement, you shouldn't really be accessing any kind of grief counselling or anything like that, because it kind of, what's the word, like a problem, that's not a word, I was going to say problemizes, but I'm pretty sure that's not a word. I'm sure there's a way of encompassing it, but it basically creates a problem when there isn't one. It's completely normal with grief to kind of feel those emotions. So doing kind of some sort of grief counselling can kind of add a problem when there is, make something into a problem when it isn't. But bereavement during COVID has had a massive impact, especially when you think about things like how many people are kind of affected by it. And it can almost be like, okay, this death is just another statistic, which is so unfortunate, but it kind of is. And it can really take away from the meaningfulness of that death. And then you've got things like not being able to attend funerals, not being able to access that social support that can be really important at a time of bereavement. And then you've got loss of income. So obviously when we went into our initial lockdown, a lot of people lost their jobs, and not being able to kind of provide, not being able to have that economic stability. Yeah, I've just seen a comment, many of us are caring for COVID patients day in and out. Exactly. So you're seeing it, and it can kind of become that, almost that compassion fatigue, can't it? Of just like seeing it day in and day out and really struggling to kind of acknowledge how many feelings are coming with it of all of those bereavements, and dealing with that for the family and having to tell the family as well. I would imagine it's quite a difficult thing to do. So then loss of income, loss of that economic stability, loss of being able to provide for families. And then you've got isolation and boredom, which are two kind of really key things that we found, is that isolation particularly. We are, even if we're kind of living with family, I live alone. So I've definitely found myself becoming very isolated over COVID. But even if you're living with family, you are just seeing the same people day in and out. And you're not seeing the friends or the other loved ones that, offer you that support on a daily basis, that you enjoy going to see, that you enjoy getting dinner with or getting drinks with, whatever it might be. And we're really missing out on that by being so isolated. And that has a massive impact on our mental health. And then boredom, and that kind of fits in with what we were talking about earlier about self-fulfillment and self-actualization, of reaching that full potential and feeling as though you're contributing something meaningful. And with boredom, if obviously, I think for a lot of us, we did just carry on working throughout the pandemic. But when you think about a lot of people who didn't, and who were just furloughed, or for the young people who weren't at school, it is just like incessant boredom of just not knowing what to do and not feeling as though you are contributing anything or doing anything positive or meaningful. And then you've got anxiety, a massive one. This has probably been the one that we've seen increase the most, is that anxiety for yourself and for your loved ones, that fear of, am I going to get it? Is someone I love going to get it? Am I going to get it and then pass it on to someone I love? And it's just that fear and that anxiety of, and we are just living in a state of just permanent anxiety, I think, at the moment, of just what's going to happen in our jobs, what's going to happen in our lives, in our personal lives. And it really is taking a toll on a lot of people, I think. And then you've got work pressure. So I don't need to talk about the demand on the NHS right now. We're kind of all being pushed to our limits, especially when you think about kind of in hospitals. And I think it was Emily, like you said, of that kind of caring for COVID patients day in and out, and that increased demand of your services. For us, it's kind of that increased demand in mental health services. We're all kind of experiencing this increased demand, and we've got the same pressures, and we've got the same pressures of underfunding and overworking and understaffing, and all of the same pressures that we've always had, but just with this added, really different way of working. And then even outside of healthcare, we've got people. I have a really close friend who's a lawyer, and she's a solicitor. She does wills, and that has obviously taken a massive increase. So we're finding that even though we're embracing this whole new way of working, we've got the same pressures and the same demands and a ton of targets to meet, if not more. And that is really taking its toll on a lot of people, and it can really impact our mental health and our ability to self-care. So when might we kind of need to be embracing self-care a little bit more? I think this is something that, okay, so day in and out, if we haven't slept very well, we might find that we're struggling with all of these things. And so that's kind of the obvious stuff. But actually, we might find irritability. And again, we are living with the same sort of people every day. We are going to get irritated. We are going to kind of find ourselves getting a bit more maybe snappy at people here and there. But when you find that actually it's becoming a problem and you're really struggling to kind of be yourself, is when it might be becoming a bit of a problem. Withdrawal, so even from the people who you are able to see, is really withdrawing from them, withdrawing from that social support that you've got around you, whether that's colleagues or family or friends. That might be a time to start thinking, okay, where am I at with self-care? Maybe I need to kind of be checking in with people a little bit more. Maybe I need to be checking in with myself a little bit more. Compassion fatigue, I just talked about this a little bit, of we're kind of seeing really similar things. So Emily, like you were saying, I'm sure in hospitals you're kind of caring for COVID patients, you're caring for families affected by COVID, you're caring for just the same people that you were caring for before, and it can become really tiring seeing the same thing day in and out. For us, we see a lot of similar problems, and it can become really difficult to kind of maintain that compassion and empathy. And actually, when we find that we're reaching a point where we're really not able to do that, or we're getting a bit desensitized to it, it might be a time to kind of take a step back and think, okay, am I providing effective care? And if I'm not, it might be because I'm just not caring for myself enough, and maybe I do need to start putting myself first. And then physical fatigue. So this is, again, like when we're thinking about maybe not sleeping very well, we are just going to feel physically tired. But a lot of the time, even when we have slept well, we'll wake up and we'll still feel exhausted. And in those moments, it's really important to maybe just check in with your body a little bit, figure out where it is that you're feeling tension. We do something called a body scan. So this is kind of focusing on each muscle group. So maybe you'd start with your feet, and then you'd go up to your calves, and then just work your way up from your body, and just notice where you're feeling any tension. If you are feeling tension, it can be really helpful to kind of clench and then release each of those muscle groups and almost feel that tension coming out. It's a lot easier said than done, but it can help to just check in with your body every now and again and just figure out where you are feeling that. So then we come on to the barriers to self-care, and these are, we all know these barriers. Time is probably the biggest one that we find. I just don't have time to do nice things for myself. I'm overworked. I'm working long hours, and then I come home to my family, or I come home to other responsibilities, and I just don't have time to take out of my day to care for myself. Energy. So coming home after a really long day of work, the last thing you want to do is think about self-care or think about something else that you have to do. And I will talk a bit about how this is just, we need to change our mindset of how we think about self-care. Self-care isn't a chore. And when we start to think of it as a chore, we are going to face these barriers. And I'll talk about that in a sec. And then we've got forgetfulness. So sometimes we are just so busy in the craziness of our lives that we will just forget. Like, we'll just forget to eat. I know when I was working on an inpatient ward, I would go a whole shift and I just would forget to eat. And I'd just come home at the end of the day and be like, oh, I just forgot to eat today. I just didn't have time. And I'm sure that's not new to any of you. I'm sure you've all kind of experienced moments like that where you've just been so busy all day, you've just forgotten to take that time, or even forgotten to take a break or whatever it might be. You might even find that you haven't been to the toilet all day. And I'm like, oh, my bad, I forgot to do that. And then you've got things like guilt and shame. So this is kind of the more emotional stuff of it. It's that feeling of, why do I need to? Why do I need to take a minute to self-care? Why can I not just cope with everything? I'm supposed to be putting the patient first and putting whoever I'm working with first, which is the ethos of healthcare, is putting that patient first. So I shouldn't be feeling as if actually I'm feeling a bit burnt out. I shouldn't be feeling like that because this is my whole job. And actually, it's not selfish. Self-care is not a selfish thing. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you can't care for other people, if you're empty yourself, if you haven't cared for yourself, and you haven't taken steps to keep yourself happy and to keep yourself well, you're not going to be able to care for anyone else. And then it's the kind of thing of what helps. I don't know what helps. And it's really about kind of exploring and not knowing and trying out things that have helped for other people. I'm just seeing guilt is a big thing because saying it all, yeah, exactly. It's just being, all of us going through the same thing doesn't take away from how much it can impact us. We are all hearing things like, oh, well, we're all feeling anxious, we're all feeling stressed, we're all feeling sad and lonely and isolated and bored. That doesn't take away from how important it is for us as individuals. And I think this is one of the big things that COVID is impacting us on, is that it is this collective, we're all dealing with this, and it's taken away from how impactful that is for each of us. And it can, in some ways, it can help to kind of have that support and have that, okay, at least I know you're also really struggling, and that kind of gives you that validation of, okay, it's not just me. But it's really important to not invalidate it for yourself and think, okay, just because you're going through this doesn't mean I shouldn't be myself. Again, it's not selfish to care for yourself, and you don't need to feel guilty for needing to take a step back and needing to take a break, because again, you don't have unlimited capacity to care for people. None of us do. And then when we think about kind of what is it that helps, what helps for you might not help for me. So it's really about finding what works for you. Self-care is very, very unique. I find if I light a scented candle, I officially feel like I've got my life together. That is not going to work for all of you. The same way, if I think about activities like playing a sport, I am the most uncoordinated person in the world, and playing a sport would just stress me out. Whereas for some of you, you might find that actually when you were younger, you used to really enjoy playing tennis, or now you still really enjoy playing tennis or football or whatever it might be. So going out and doing a sport is likely to be a form of self-care for you, a bit of fun. It's really about choosing activities that are congruent with your personal beliefs and your culture so that they're meaningful for you. There's no point in doing things that aren't going to be meaningful for you. There's no point in baking a cake for someone or baking a cake for yourself if you don't like cake. Do you know what I mean? It's really about finding those things that are going to work for you. If kind of a core personal belief for you or a value for you that you really enjoy and you really care about is doing something for someone else, you might find that actually baking a cake or going and spending time with someone you love will make you feel really good. Whereas if that's not something that makes you feel good, it's not going to work. Also thinking about your culture, thinking about things that maybe you grew up with, things that you do in your family. And it's really about choosing things that are going to fit with that. Growing up, Harry Potter was a big part of my life. I think I don't fail to mention Harry Potter in at least every single presentation I do. I don't know how, but it was a really big part of me growing up, and I have a lot of really positive connotations to it. So if I am struggling with self-care and I am feeling a bit rubbish, I will just stick on Harry Potter, or I'll stick on the Harry Potter soundtrack and I'll officially feel better. But it's really about finding the stuff that will work for you, and it's likely to be very, very unique. So you can get ideas from things like presentations or other people, but you're going to have to explore to find what is really useful for you. So this is what I was talking about earlier, about kind of thinking of self-care as part of your lifestyle. So self-care doesn't have to be a massive thing. It doesn't have to be going out and buying something nice for yourself or spending a long time kind of cooking or baking or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a huge deal. It can simply be getting a full night of sleep rather than doing an all-nighter. Getting out of bed, success. When you don't want to, that is successful. It could be making sure you're eating 3 meals a day. It could be just making sure you take that break at work. And it doesn't matter what you do with that break, it's just making sure you take it. Self-care isn't a chore. Don't make it a chore, because when you make it a chore, it's going to be impossible for you to do, because it's just going to give you that barrier of time, and it's just going to be you thinking, I don't have time for this. I've got such a busy day. I don't have time to self-care. But when you think of it as part of your lifestyle, building it into your routine, when you eat, don't do other stuff. Just sit and eat your meal and enjoy it. And you will find that you feel fuller for longer, by the way. I've tried it and it does work. So just building that into your routine, eating properly, sleeping properly, exercising. And then every now and again, when you do find that you have a bit of extra time, maybe you've got a day off work, it is doing those kind of nice, more kind of caring things for yourself. And it's also, as part of your lifestyle, embracing that feeling of self-compassion. And throughout your day, just when you are struggling or at any point when things are getting a bit overwhelming, it's just thinking to yourself, actually, I care about myself. Can have compassion to myself. I might have made this mistake, but that's okay. I've forgiven it and we've moved on. It's really embracing that self-kindness and self-compassion and respect for yourself, for your body and for your mind. So being mindfulness is a big thing. I think there are various kind of speakers today who are going to talk a bit more about mindfulness, but I thought I'd just mention it. Mindfulness is basically I like to call it the art of being aware. And it's basically just about being in the present moment. I think for most of the time, maybe even right now, listening to me, you might be thinking about, okay, I really need to go and do that. I probably shouldn't have signed up for this because I've got about 50 other things that I need to be doing. You might be thinking about things that are coming that you might be a bit stressed about. You might be thinking about things in the past. I didn't sleep very well last night. I had a really weird dream last night. I need to deal with that. That really pissed me off the other day. And you're likely to kind of be thinking about various different things in the past and the future. It's very rare that we just sit and we embrace the present moment. And we're conscious of it and we're aware of the moment that we're in now. And a key part of mindfulness is that non-judgmentalness. So if I sat here and kind of said to you all, okay, right now I want you to be completely aware of what's going on right now, of listening to me talk, it's likely that you're going to struggle to do that, because none of us can sit, even as I'm sitting here talking, I'm thinking about the other things that I've got to do. But when we when we are actively trying to be mindful and we find that we're experiencing other thoughts that are stopping us from being present, it's about not judging those thoughts and just letting them come. But yeah, that's true. People really do struggle with things like that. Sorry, I just saw a comment come through. I just thought I'd comment on it. So it's kind of letting yourself accept that you're struggling to be in the present moment and not judging yourself for struggling to be in the present moment. As you try to be mindful, whatever kind of way, I've put apps can help, apps like Headspace, Calm. There's loads of different apps that can kind of help you to get a feel for what mindfulness is about. And while you're doing that, it's likely that you're going to struggle. But as you struggle and as you find that your thoughts are coming in, it's just about accepting them and thinking, okay, oh, I started to think about that. Let me just bring my attention back to the present moment and let that go, and not beating yourself up for it. We all have the quality of mindfulness. We're all able to be mindful. But when we're dealing with this craziness of life, we do struggle to access that quality, and we do struggle to just kind of sit and be present in the moment. You might find, for example, if you're out with your friends, and you really want to enjoy what's going on, you want to be in that moment, you want to engage in that conversation and that fun and everything that's going on, but you might just find yourself thinking all these thoughts of, this is what I need to do tomorrow, this is what I should have done yesterday, and just constantly, your mind is just constantly going. And you might find actually when you actively try to stop that, you just think about it more. It's that kind of old thing of, if I tell you not to think about a pink elephant, you're all going to be thinking about pink elephants. If you try to push that out of your head, it's likely to just come back stronger. So it's really about noticing when your thoughts have kind of gone spirally a little bit, and just accept that, and then slowly bring your attention back. And that, you might have to do that like 100 times, and that's fine. It's just about trying to be in that moment, and you'll find that you enjoy the moment a lot more. Like I said, when you eat and you do nothing else, recently I've been trying to eat without having Netflix on in the background, and I find that I get fuller a lot quicker, and I enjoy my food a lot more, and I remember how it tastes, and I just it's a better experience all around. And it's like that in every situation that we're in. When we are mindful and when we're present in that moment, we're likely to enjoy it more and to get more meaning out of it. So I've put a picture of a leaf for a specific reason. I thought I'd just tell this story quickly. Mindfulness is a really difficult thing to get a grip on. When I was first introduced to mindfulness, I was about 18, so I was already going into it like, well, this isn't going to work. This is just rubbish. And I was in a group setting, and someone gave each of us a leaf. It wasn't as green as this one. It was one of those that had just kind of been picked up out of a October evening off the floor. And they said to us, I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes, and I want you to be mindful of this leaf for 3 minutes. And I had a kind of vague understanding of what mindfulness was, but hadn't really done anything with it. And so I was sat there looking at this leaf for 3 minutes. And honestly, I was just thinking, I think the whole time I was just thinking, this is absolute rubbish. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And afterwards, when it came to feedback, everyone around me was saying really like deep, meaningful things of how they were thinking about photosynthesis, and they were thinking about how intricate a leaf is and how meaningful it is. And they found their mind wandering, but they were able to bring it back. And it came to me, and all I could think was, it's just a leaf. It's just green. That's all there really is to it. And it's really, since that moment, and I still to this day, if someone hands me a leaf and tells me to be mindful, I'll just chuck it back in their face, because mindfulness is really about finding something that works for you. So I love an adult coloring book now. I will just sit in color for like 10 minutes and I'll be absolutely great, and it will be a wonderful experience. And each time while I'm coloring, I notice my mind wandering, or I notice myself judging each of the thoughts that I'm getting, or I find myself going out of the lines and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and then I start beating myself up about it. I really just notice it and just bring my attention back, and I'm able to experience it mindfully. Music is a really key thing, a really helpful way to be mindful as well, of just being mindful of the music that you're listening to, or the thing that you're doing right now, or the book that you're reading. And so it's about finding something that is useful for you. Mindfulness can sound so like wishy-washy sometimes, of just like, oh, what do you mean? Just be present. But actually, when you find something that works, it can be really, really effective to just help you de-stress. Because a lot of the time when we de-stress, we do it in a way that just stresses us out more. But mindfulness is really just about being in that present moment and embracing that present moment, rather than focusing on what we should have done and what we need to do. It's just being there and being okay. I'm aware that that sounded a bit wishy-washy, but it's fine. A really helpful kind of strategy that we use, well, that I use a lot with kind of young people who are experiencing anxiety, or even for myself when I'm experiencing anxiety, is the 5-4-3-2-1 coping technique. And this is really about using your senses to self-care. And the 5-4-3-2-1 coping technique is really a way of grounding and just bringing you back to the present moment. So it's about kind of acknowledging the 5 things you can see about you, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And you can adapt that if you can't think of 5 things that you can see, that's fine. But it's really a good way of just bringing yourself back to the present. one of the ways in which I use this personally is if I've come out of a really difficult session with a young person and I'm feeling really overwhelmed, or I'm feeling all these thoughts and I'm thinking, okay, I need to do this, especially if we think about something like safeguarding. We've just had a session and something's come out, or we've just seen a patient and something's come out, and we need to follow all the procedures and all the protocol to do a safeguarding or whatever it might be. And feeling a bit overwhelmed. And it's so important in that moment to just take a step back and just acknowledge that you're feeling overwhelmed. And yes, although our ethos is putting the patient first, you are also allowed in this moment to take a minute for yourself. And this technique takes literally a minute, if that. It's so helpful to just have a look around you and just think of these 5 things and just acknowledge the present moment for a minute before going back to whatever it is that you need to do. And it can really help to just calm your mind a little bit and just help you get your, just by not thinking about it for a minute and thinking about all these other things and thinking about where you are and just grounding yourself. And you might find that this is a really helpful technique to use if you ever have a patient who's feeling quite anxious, is just getting them to do this really quickly and just be aware of where they are and what's going on for them. Especially for things like touch. A lot of the time we find, I don't know if you guys are familiar with kind of dissociation, but a lot of the time we see young people who are feeling so anxious or so overwhelmed that they dissociate. So they kind of, it's almost like they feel their mind leave them. They're not really with themselves. And this technique is really helpful for that, of just kind of helping them to ground themselves and to realize where they are. And I've put chocolate. I don't know why I've put chocolate. I think it's just because I try to incorporate chocolate into everything as well. But you can mindfully eat chocolate. This is when I should really put more information on my PowerPoints, but you know, taste the chocolate. I'll just say that. So using your senses is really, really helpful way to kind of just ground and to help yourself in these kind of stressful moments. And then there's a really, I think this is probably, if you don't take away anything else from this talk, please take this away. Set boundaries. The biggest barrier, as we were talking about, is time. But you have some level of control over that. Yeah, you might work long shifts. I get that. You might work 14 hours. You might even work 24 hours. You might be on really, really long shifts. And I get that. But time doesn't have to be a barrier. When you realize that you have limits, we all have our limits. Where, like I said earlier, we don't have an unlimited capacity to give to people. You are allowed to say no. And I think this kind of need for perfection, I think it's quite a prominent thing in healthcare. I think I find that with most healthcare professionals I talk to, everyone kind of has this need for perfection or saying yes to everything or doing everything for everyone. Because we are kind of living with that thing of putting the patient first. And actually, sometimes we extend it to putting everyone first. We might find that we're putting our colleagues first, or putting our managers first, or putting our friends or our family first before ourselves. And it's really important when we're noticing that we're doing that to just realize that you are allowed to be kind to yourself and you are allowed to say no. No one's going to think less of you. When I think about all the times that I've just agreed to do things for my colleagues, and they've always been so grateful, and I've always felt great afterwards, but I've also always felt a bit overwhelmed if I've said yes to too many things. When I think about the times where actually I've said no and I've set those boundaries and I've said, actually, I'm really busy today, I can't do this. I can't think of a single occasion where someone has said to me, oh, you should really be doing that, or has thought badly of me for saying no. It's always been like, oh, that's not a problem. We can find someone else, because you have your own caseload, you have your own workload, you have your own things to do and your own capacity. So please set boundaries and be okay with that. Be okay with saying no and recognizing your limits. You do not have to be perfect. And in fact, the more you try to be perfect, the more you try to ignore the limits that you have for yourself, the more burnt out you're going to get. And in the long term, it's likely to take a bit of a toll on you. And actually, by just saying no in that moment, in the long term, it's likely to have more positive effects by allowing you to carry on working and being effective in your role. And then we think about consistency. And this is kind of about embracing that self-care as a lifestyle. it's about kind of scheduling time every day. So let's say self-care for you is um, having a really warm bubble bath with all the expensive bath bombs and salts and all of that. Um, it's really about scheduling that time every day for it, or even if it's just kind of taking that break, it's about making sure you take that break, even when you're too busy in the way that you probably see as I'm too busy for a break. You're not. You can absolutely take that break. And I say that knowing that actually some of you probably are too busy for that break, in which case, okay, that's we can adapt that. Maybe after work you can do something. But it's really about scheduling that time every day. Even when you're thinking you can't be bothered or you aren't in the right mindset. There's no such thing as a right mindset. Um, well, there is, but you don't have to be in a specific mindset to care for yourself. It's you really need to start thinking about self-care as, and I say this to myself as well. Um, it's about kind of thinking of self-care as that lifestyle choice as opposed to a chore. And when you do that, it'll be a lot easier for you to schedule that time every day or to think about self-care every day. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It might just be taking a break from work or having a meal or lighting a candle, whatever it might be. It's just making sure you do it every single day to form that habit. So, a few things to be aware of. Too much advice. And I say this knowing that basically this presentation is me giving some level of advice. But it's really, when we think about the amount of advice that we're getting right now, things like being productive in lockdown, what we can do to help ourselves, what we can do to care for ourselves, it's a lot of pressure. It can be a lot of pressure to kind of self care or to be productive or to be meaningful, whatever it might be. But really, it's about listening to your own instincts. You know yourself better than anyone else knows you, better than I know you, better than all the articles you read about care or lockdown or whatever it might be. You know yourself the best. So listen to your own instincts. When you find that actually today I won't be able to take my break. That's your instinct. That's you saying, okay, I've got to do this because that's what will make me feel better if I do this. If I take a break and I'm just going to be stressed for the whole break, it's probably not worth it. Whereas if once you've finished whatever it was you were supposed to be doing, if you then take a break as opposed to your scheduled break, that will be more beneficial for you. So it's really about knowing yourself and listening to your own instincts rather than listening to all the people who are going to be giving you a ton of advice. I know when we first were, I don't know about for you, but when we first went into lockdown, we were getting about 3 emails a day from our NHS trust about COVID, about mental health webinars, about this, about that, and it was a lot. It's a lot of pressure. And it's really in those moments to just really think about what you need as opposed to what everyone else is saying that you need because they don't know, only you know. Too much Zoom, Teams, Skype, WebEx, all of the stuff. I know when first lockdown happened, a lot of people were doing things like Zoom quizzes and Zoom drinks nights with their friends. I was as well. And actually, there is such a thing as too much of it. As great as all of these video consultations have been, and video conferencing has been, there are still barriers to be aware of. We're together, but we're not really together. Um, if we were doing this in person, I would be looking out at a bunch of lovely faces. Instead, I'm looking out at everyone who's got their video off, which is fair because I usually have my video off as well. But when you think about it, yeah, it's really great and it's really useful and it's been really beneficial. But it also has got its limitations and its barriers, and it's really being aware of that. Not everything has to be a Zoom meeting. It can just be a phone call or an email, or whatever. It doesn't. You don't feel that pressure to kind of do everything as a video consultation, especially in your spare time when you've been doing it all day at work. You then don't need to go off and do a Zoom family night or whatever it might be. And then technology, and this is, I've put this in red, which is how important it is to me. When we think about technology, we're getting constant updates, especially when we think about back in March, we were getting daily briefings. The news is all over this pandemic, obviously, as it would be. But even when we think aside from the pandemic, we're getting constant updates on life. It's just every day, every minute of every day, there's something new coming through to us. we're getting messages, we're getting people asking us for things or people talking to us about things. And that can be really overwhelming. For a long time in March, I just stopped listening to the news because it was just stressing me out. Every day I was just hearing Boris talk about something else and just getting more and more stressed just listening to it. And actually, when I stopped, I was fine. I was like, yeah, this pandemic is still happening, but I don't need to really buy into all of the stress and the anxiety that everyone else has around it when I'm dealing with my own. And it's just dealing with that personal stuff yourself rather than looking at what everyone else is thinking. And then we've got things like comparisons. So this is just general, and I use this a lot for, especially it's a big thing for young people, especially when we think about things like Instagram. That kind of comparisons, those social comparisons of this person seems to have their life together a lot more than I do. They're prettier than me, they're skinnier than me, they are more successful than me. And when we think about it right now in COVID, we might find that we're seeing people being so productive. We're seeing banana bread after banana bread being made on Instagram. We're seeing people doing these really amazing things. And actually, it can make you feel really bad about yourself because you're like, oh, what am I doing? And hopefully, none of you feel that way, because we do all work in such a kind of meaningful, worthwhile profession as everyone does. Um, but I know even for me, even when I do feel really fulfilled at work, I can still feel like that when I look on Instagram and I say, oh, you're being far more productive than I am. I'm just lying in bed watching Netflix all day. And it's really about kind of breaking down those comparisons that we're making because those comparisons make us feel bad. It's just a fact. Most of the time, they just make us feel bad because we're thinking of all the things we should be doing that everyone else is doing. And it stops us from really acknowledging what we are doing and the massive contribution we're making. And we're just judging ourselves in relation to all these people whose lives we do not know. And then technology also gives us even less social contact. You might find you've been let's say you've had a day of meetings, you've had a day like today where you've just been on a screen all day where you're watching people talk and you're in meetings or wherever it might be. You might find that you go home and you're with your family, for example, but you're still on your phone and you're checking in with messages and you're checking Twitter or Instagram, whatever it might be. And all day you've been behind the screen and then you go home and you're still behind the screen. And actually, it just means you're having even less social contact. You might think that technology is helping you have social contact. It's not. It is a little bit, but in reality, is it really? You've got people in front of you. It's really acknowledging the people that you do have and the people that you do see when you've been behind a screen all day. And social media can be great, and phones are great in allowing you to keep in touch with the people that you love and have those conversations and have FaceTimes and have Zooms with them. But it's also about acknowledging when that's getting a bit too much. And it's just this constant stimulation of stuff. And sometimes you need to take a step back from it and just put the phone down and just embrace. It's kind of that mindfulness, isn't it? It's just kind of embracing that present moment and where you are. And again, I say this to myself as well, as if I'm not on my phone all the time, but I do find that on the days where I'm not, or I try to limit the amount of time I'm on my phone, or I just put my phone on do not disturb for a while, I actually find I'm feeling a lot better by the end of the day. My mental health is kind of a lot better. I feel a lot calmer. And it's just because I don't have that constant stimulation that's going on. So you might find that that can be quite helpful, bit of a detox. And then finally, use the free stuff. So the NHS is good for this. We've got loads of different things that we can use. We've got employee assistance programs, therapy and counselling services, occupational health. You can talk about all of these with your manager, or you can make self-referrals. I'm sure you can find out from your trust. You probably already know how to access these things, but use them. They're free. We all love something that's free. And actually, they can be really, really helpful. Occupational health is something that if you're struggling in the workplace, but things like employee assistance programs and therapy and counselling services, that's just free help right there that you can just talk to someone. And it can be really, really helpful and meaningful. And then if you find that actually your mental health is really deteriorating and you really kind of need some more immediate support, you've got helplines like the Samaritans, Mental Health Matters. There's loads of helplines that you don't actually need to call, that you can just kind of text in or email in. The whole point of this slide really is that when I think about the Mind study that found that so many people weren't accessing mental health services because they felt like they didn't deserve it, being in a pandemic doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for support for your mental health. Just because everyone else is feeling this way doesn't mean that it doesn't impact you, doesn't mean that you need to feel guilty for it. If anything, reaching out is more important now than it ever was before, because things are tough. Things are really tough. And just be aware of that and be kind to yourself and allow yourself to have that moment to just reach out to someone. So that's it really. I think there is some time for questions. I've also put my email address on this in case anyone had any questions that they wanted to email in for me, and I can do my best to answer that. I will at some point stop sharing once I figured that out. There we go. So if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Summayya, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that talk. I cannot say, I can't speak for other people, but I think at this time of COVID and pressures in the NHS, it couldn't be a more relevant talk for myself. And I know as a cohort, as health professionals, we're all pretty high-paid personalities. A lot of us are perfectionists, and I think we heap pressures on ourselves. So just being able to hear someone talk about, well, what to expect, what to look out for, and ways to deal with it, it's amazing. It's really cool. And I love your lead story because I've definitely struggled with mindfulness over the years and use it in different forms. But yeah, it's really been hard to kind of get on board. Once it started working, I really enjoy it. I want to ask if anyone has any questions. I'm going to switch participants so you can unmute yourselves and then you can just pop your hand up and shout something out. Otherwise, I wanted to ask actually, how do you find, like everyone in this room at the moment listening to you talk today clearly recognizes that they're interested in self-care and they want to engage with it, but how do you engage colleagues or friends who perhaps aren't open to finding ways to look after themselves, but clearly are struggling, especially people feeling the burden from extra shifts and COVID patients, but I mean, could be anything really.
I find a really, oh, I'm just hearing an echo. I don't know if everyone else is. No, okay, it's gone. I find a really helpful way of kind of getting other people to get on board with self-care is when you model it yourself. When you kind of, if we're talking about like a friend or a colleague, is doing something with them. So using an activity that actually is for both of you together. I know that for me, a lot of my friends really struggle with self-care. I really struggle with self-care a lot of the time. And doing something like saying, okay, let's bake a cake together or let's go for a walk together and just not talk about the craziness that is life right now, but just have a nice stroll and just think about all the good stuff. And that can be really helpful. So just doing it with them and modeling it for them. But also, I think it also comes into this thing of that too much advice and that pressure. Sometimes you can't get someone to, I know sometimes you might see a colleague who looks like they're really struggling, could really use a bit of self-care, but it's also about kind of understanding that they know themselves better than you probably know them and allowing them to have that. And then if you really start to notice and it starts to get quite difficult, it might be, like I said, doing something with them and kind of modeling it for them, but also giving them that empowerment and really empowering them to realize that they are in charge of their own story. They are in charge of what happens for them and what matters for them. So yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, that was really helpful. Thank you. I'm just having a look. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to read it out, or do you want me to read it out? You've got a question in the group.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Do you think that some people's mental health improved this year? For example, having a bit more space to think, resetting pace. I know I stopped suffering from fear of missing out because there was nothing to miss out on really, and kind of slowed down a bit and had just spent whole days just sitting in the garden, having a drink and reading a book, which is something I'd normally do.
Yeah, absolutely. Despite the kind of mind study that we talked about, there has been a lot of improvement. I think especially in people who have still been working and who haven't been kind of completely furloughed, there has been a lot of space to kind of do that reflection and to reset that pace. And like I think we talked a little bit about kind of embracing the arts, and I think that's been quite a big thing, like reading a book or doing some writing or just listening to some music. And I think people's mental health has definitely improved, but when we think about it kind of more generally speaking, or when we think about the more specific things that people have been impacted by, there has been maybe more anxiety, but less kind of pressure to kind of cope with that. So it's that validation. Okay, a lot of people are struggling, and that validation can really help. As much as we talk about that thing of everyone's going through this, so it doesn't matter that I am, but actually that validation could be really, really useful. Knowing that a lot of people are in the same boat can really help to improve that mental health. And we have definitely found that young people and adults have also improved in their mental health. It's not all doom and gloom, just mostly.
Can I just ask a question, please? Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm one of the anaesthetic registrars in Bristol. Firstly, thank you so much for a fantastic talk. It was really enlightening, and it's really helped because my husband is a doctor as well. So yeah, I've picked up loads of techniques for both of us really. So I'll pass on the talk. My question was, and it was just from an experience that I had recently. So last week I did a run of 4 night shifts, and I'm working on ITU at the moment, and I really found myself sort of halfway through the 4th night shift. So it's not as I'm sure you understand, it's not an option that you can't just go home early, you can't just step away because you are it, the consultants aren't in, there's sort of only 2 of you trying to hold the fort together. So it's not an option of, do you know what, guys, I'm going to step away for an hour and just have a lunch break. And I really sensed, as you mentioned earlier on, just my compassion was really starting to lag, and it was that sense of caring, and it was, so I had more junior people ask me, what shall I do? And I could feel that little demon on my shoulder just sort of going, oh, do you know what, I just don't care anymore, which is not good. And obviously, as you said, this isn't the reason why I went into this job. And that's when I realized sort of, well, first I thought, well, luckily this is my last night shift and I've got the weekend off, because I don't know if I would have managed to come back on another one. But I know you mentioned your technique of, your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'd definitely use that if I've got a lot of tasks to complete. I think, to help me prioritize, I think that would be really good to just help you concentrate. But do you have any advice of how I can, just reset myself quickly to carry on with the rest of the shift? I don't know if that question makes sense, really.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And I think, I mean, I can completely empathize. I remember doing 4 night shifts in a row and just being completely drained afterwards. I think a really key part, you've talked about kind of that compassion fatigue. A really key part of that is just just being okay with that. I think sometimes we feel this pressure to just be saint-like and to just have tons of compassion and to be able to kind of help the junior members of staff and to really kind of be there for everyone and just be perfect in that sense. And actually, you can't be expected to do that. You're just a person, And so it's really about acknowledging that this is difficult for you to be compassionate right now. And that doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't make you bad at your job. It might not be why you came into the field, for sure, and it's probably not a very comfortable feeling, but it's okay. We all do experience compassion fatigue, definitely. And I think in terms of resetting, that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is really helpful. But also, when you can't take an hour, that's okay. Just take 5 minutes. I remember when I was working on the ward, I used to just go, the only place I could ever get privacy was in the toilet. So I would just go lock myself in the toilet for 5 minutes and do some kind of deep breathing exercises. So Headspace is a really good app for this, and they're kind of currently offering free, like a free subscription until December. So we've not got long, but you might as well use it for the last month. And you can do really, really quick kind of mindfulness meditation exercises. But if even that is kind of, you don't have that much time for that, a really helpful thing is when you're kind of taking a few deep breaths, but when you're taking these deep breaths, making sure that you're breathing out for longer than you're breathing in. So you might breathe in for like 4 seconds, hold your breath for 5 seconds, and then breathe out for 7 seconds. And what that does is it kind of, I don't know, does some biology stuff. You're all doctors, I'm not, so I'm sure you know, but it does something to your nervous system, and it really can help to just reset yourself a little bit and help you to get on with that shift. And it really is like one of those, I know you only have 5 minutes, and sometimes it is just about thinking, okay, it's okay that I'm not feeling very compassionate right now. And that might be when you start setting those boundaries and start setting those limits a little bit. If you've got someone junior coming to you being like, actually, can you just not right now? I don't know how able you are to do that.
No, that's a fantastic suggestion, because it's, yeah, I'm not saying that we didn't have time to eat or drink or anything. We definitely were going to the coffee room, but it's just, as you said, when you're surrounded in that environment and then all you're talking about is work. So again, I was surrounded with my colleagues. So yes, we would go and have a break in inverted commas and sit down and then get back to it. But it was about 2, 3 a.m. that I really realized, you know what, my brain really isn't engaged in this, and I'm really not, yeah, exactly, the compassion fatigue. So yeah, I think locking myself